Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5340 Introduction to Public Policy and Management. Today we are diving deep into the essential readings for Section '06, the role of citizens in decision-making. We've got quite a stack of material here, really exploring everything from the theory behind citizen engagement to how it works in the real world and, well, the challenges too. It's not always straightforward.
No, it really isn't. It's a topic that's, absolutely fundamental to public policy, but also incredibly complex. I mean, the whole idea of citizens shaping the decisions that affect their own lives,
Yeah.
that's democracy
Right.
at its core. But how that actually works in practice, especially when governments are dealing with really intricate problems, tight budgets, it's a constant puzzle.
It really is. So, what's our mission today for you, our listener? We're going to unpack the core arguments for why citizen participation is crucial. We'll explore the different ways it happens, from just like token gestures all the way to actual power sharing. And then we'll connect that to something equally vital, but often pretty tricky: performance measurement in the public sector. Should walk away from this deep dive with a much clearer picture of all the nuances involved, probably some surprising insights, maybe a few aha moments about how governments actually try or sometimes really struggle to listen. Let's jump right in.
Okay, let's start unpacking this with our very first source, the article called Citizens and Resource Allocation. This one immediately highlights a central problem, doesn't it? Government services. They're often consumed collectively, paid for through taxes. It makes public sector budget problems incredibly complex because there isn't that direct link, like buying something in a store. So the big question is, how do you meaningfully involve citizens in these difficult trade-offs?
Yeah, and what's fascinating, and something people often forget, is that the article points out this collective nature means public managers face what they often call wicked problems. These aren't just complicated, they're issues so complex, so interconnected. Finding clear solutions is tough. And just asking citizens for their preferences, it's inherently troublesome because the context is missing. Citizens have a right to participate, absolutely. That's fundamental. But making that participation effective, making it count, that's the real challenge.
Right. Shouting at a town hall or filling out a basic survey often doesn't cut it.
Exactly. They don't get the full picture, especially the trade-offs.
And the article gives us a really concrete example of trying to tackle this. They talk about a web-based survey in West Hartford, Connecticut. What was the innovation there? What were they trying to do differently?
The West Hartford survey. It was pretty clever, actually. It was designed for real-time interactivity. And this is the crucial part. It was specifically tailored to present respondents with actual trade-offs between service levels and taxes.
Okay, so not just do you like parks, but do you like parks this much compared to, say, road repairs, given the tax implications?
Precisely. It moves way beyond those simple satisfaction surveys the article mentions. You know, the ones they often get these consistently high, almost universally positive rankings?
Because people aren't seeing the bill, basically.
Exactly. Citizens often lack that knowledge about the trade-offs, the budget constraints. So, of course, they're satisfied with everything. But this interactive approach in West Hartford, it forced citizens to see the fiscal impact of their choices, like realizing that just maintaining current service levels would mean, I think it was, a 6% tax increase.
Wow, that certainly focuses the mind.
It does. It turns a wish list into something resembling a real-world decision.
So it's about creating this full information environment, as they call it, where citizens make choices reflecting realistic scenarios, understanding the costs involved.
That makes so much sense. It links right into that idea of an active, informed citizenry. But the article also talks about different ways participation happens, right, along a sort of spectrum of how representative they are and what kind of information they actually give decision makers. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Absolutely. The authors of Citizens and Resource Allocation do a nice job classifying these methods. They look at two things. How well does the method represent the whole community? And how much genuinely useful information does it provide? So down at the lower end, you've got things like, those clip-out coupons in the newspaper, or maybe those come one, come all public forums.
The town hall meeting approach?
Right. And generally, these provide very little useful information because you only hear from the most motivated, maybe the loudest voices, or just those with the time to show up. They're not representative.
So it might feel like participation, but it's not giving a true picture. Exactly. It might check a box, satisfy a legal requirement, but it doesn't tell you what the broader community really thinks or leads, especially the nuances. Think about a simple yes-no vote on a tax increase. You know the result, but you have no idea why people voted that way.
Okay. And moving up that scale a bit, What about things like hand-picked boards or advisory groups? They seem more involved.
They can be. Those groups, like a city budget advisory committee, can definitely become much more informed. They can really dig into the details, the trade-offs, explore different scenarios.
So the information quality might be higher.
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
But the problem is, they almost never represent the whole citizenry. Members might be chosen because, well, they already agree with officials, or maybe they just get along well. They don't necessarily reflect the community's diversity or dissent.
So better information, maybe, but still lacking that broad representation.
That's the trade-off you often see there.
Which brings us to statistical sampling, I guess. That sounds like the way to really understand the whole community's view.
It is, yes, for getting that representativeness. Methods using probability sampling, like randomly selected citizen surveys, are specifically designed to mirror the broader community. They guard against those special interests or just the loudest folks dominating.
But there's a catch there too, isn't there?
There is. The article points out a common issue. Simple citizen polls often give a pretty naive picture. They ask about satisfaction, support for services, but without knowing the costs, the trade-offs. Citizens tend to rank everything highly. Sure, more services sound great.
Right. Back to that problem.
Exactly. And this is where that interactive West Hartford survey really tried to bridge the gap. It uniquely combined the power of statistical sampling for representation with that full information environment. People saw the direct impact on their own tax bill. That forced a much more realistic, pragmatic assessment of their preferences.
That real-time consequence front and center, that seems key. So what did they find in West Hartford once people had that full information? Any surprises in terms of service preferences?
It's really interesting, actually. Some pretty logical patterns emerged. Services where support for increasing levels was highest tended to be what the authors called front yard services, things really visible to residents daily.
Like potholes and sidewalks.
Exactly. Street and sidewalk repair, maintenance, leaf collection, things you see right outside your door. Conversely, services most likely to face decreases were often those where user fees either already existed or were clearly possible. Think parks and athletic field maintenance, or maybe school sports and extracurriculars.
So people were willing to cut things where they felt the direct users could potentially pay more.
That's what it looks like, yeah. It shows citizens, when given the full picture, making pretty pragmatic, fiscally aware choices. They weren't just saying more, more, more. They were making strategic cuts where it made sense, especially if users could contribute.
That's a strong sign that informed participation can shift priorities realistically. But even with this innovative web approach, they hit some hurdles, right? Particularly with getting people to actually respond.
Oh, absolutely. The response rate for the web survey was around 25%. Now, that's comparable to many phone or mail surveys, but it was lower than they'd hoped.
And lower than the mail survey they did alongside it.
Significantly lower, yeah, which immediately flags those practical issues. The digital divide is real. Not everyone has easy internet access, and that introduces potential bias or coverage error. But the authors were good about suggesting ways to improve next time. Things like maybe offering some compensation, providing better internet access for those who need it, more follow-up, shorter web addresses, those really long ones, and maybe sending out letters beforehand to let people know it's coming.
Right, the practical stuff of actually getting people involved.
It all speaks to the real-world challenges of making engagement equitable, even with cool technology. The best tools still need careful, human-centered design and support.
Okay, that gives us a really good grounding in the basic challenge, getting meaningful input on tough resource decisions. Now, to really understand the depth, or maybe the lack of depth of citizen involvement, let's turn to a classic, a really foundational piece, A Ladder of Citizen Participation by Sherry R. Arnstein. This framework, even though it's from, the late 60s, it's still incredibly valuable for showing the different levels of actual power citizens can have. Once you see this ladder, you kind of see it everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It forces you to ask that crucial question. Is all participation really participation? Does it actually empower anyone? Arnstein's ladder, with its 8 rungs, it just brilliantly lays out how not all engagement is created equal. It categorizes participation based on the degree of power citizens actually hold. It goes from what she bluntly calls non-participation all the way up to genuine citizen control. It's such a critical tool for cutting through the jargon and seeing when participation is just, window dressing.
Let's walk through those rungs, because they really highlight the subtle and sometimes not so subtle differences. Understanding this helps you diagnose what's really going on in any participation process. Okay, starting at the very bottom, Arnstein calls this level non-participation, and the first rung is manipulation. rung 1. This isn't even real participation, it's actually a distortion of it. Citizens get put on these rubber stamp committees, told they're advising, but the real goal is to educate them into agreement or just engineer their support for decisions that are already made.
Yeah, it's about managing consent, not gathering input.
Exactly. Arnstein uses the example of citizen advisory committees, ANCSIs, for urban renewal. She says they often function mainly as PR vehicles. Officials would educate and persuade the citizens, not the other way around.
And the really shocking part is that sometimes the official guidelines legitimize this, listing things like information gathering, public relations, and support building as the committee's functions. It bakes the manipulation right in.
It's participation in name only, designed to look good while power stays firmly where it always was.
And right next to it, still on that bottom level of non-participation, is therapy, rung 2. This is maybe even more insidious. Here, citizens participate, maybe go to meetings, but the underlying assumption is that they are the problem. The goal is to cure them of their own perceived pathology.
Wow. Blaming the victim, essentially.
Pretty much. Arnstein gives this incredibly stark example. A father whose baby died, possibly due to negligence at a clinic. What does the local agency board offer him? Not an investigation, but childcare sessions.
Unbelievable.
The focus is on changing the citizen's attitude or coping skills, not questioning or changing the system that failed them. It's control disguised as help.
Okay, so those are the non-participation rungs. Then we move up slightly into what Arnstein calls tokenism. Still not real power, but a step up. The first rung here is informing, rung 3.
Right. Informing is a crucial first step, no doubt. You need information, but it's still very limited in terms of actual citizen power. It's mostly a one-way street. Information flows from officials to citizens about rights, responsibilities, options.
But Arnstein points out how this can be done poorly, right? Like using jargon.
Exactly. Officials can give superficial information or use overly technical language.
Right.
Basically discouraging questions. People end up agreeing to things they don't fully grasp. She mentions a meeting in Providence about playgrounds. The official gives this complex explanation about cost per square foot when people question unequal distribution. They back down, intimidated, no real exchange, no real influence.
Okay, so information is flowing, but maybe not in a way that empowers. Next up is consultation, rung 4. This sounds better. Surveys, meetings, hearings.
It sounds more engaging, yes,
Yeah.
but it's still firmly in the tokenism category. You invite opinions, you ask questions. But the critical problem, as Arnstein nails it, is there's zero assurance that input will actually be used, that it will be taken into account.
People get tired of being asked if nothing ever changes.
Precisely. Consultation fatigue. And often, the questions are about small, surface-level things. People might not even know bigger, more impactful options could be on the table if they had real power. That New Haven example she gives is perfect. Citizens voted on these broad, vague, motherhood-like issues, but they hadn't been involved in actually drawing up the proposal itself. It's an illusion of influence.
Right. It feels like you did something, but you didn't shape the fundamentals. Okay, and we get application, rung 5. Here, things start to shift a little. Citizens get some influence, but it's still precarious.
Yeah, placation is where tokenism starts to edge towards influence, but the power holders still keep the reins tight.
Yeah.
The classic move is putting a few worthy citizens, maybe community leaders, often handpicked onto official boards, police commissions, agency boards, things like that.
Sounds good on paper.
It can, but Arnstein points out key weaknesses. If these representatives aren't actually accountable to a constituency back in the community, and if the traditional power elite still holds the majority of seats, the have-not reps can just be outvoted or maneuvered around.
So their presence is symbolic, but doesn't necessarily change outcomes.
Often, yes. She notes many model cities' advisory committees fell here. They could advise forever, but the real decision-making power stayed with City Hall or the agency. Whether placation works out even slightly better often depends heavily on whether citizens get good technical help and how organized the community is to push its agenda.
It sounds like HUD, the federal agency, even realized this was a problem with model cities.
They did, yeah. Arnstein mentions that HUD eventually started pushing cities to actually share power, and even suggested giving funds directly to resident groups to hire their own experts. That's a huge admission that the earlier models weren't working, that genuine participation needs resources and independence.
Okay, now we're finally climbing higher. We're moving into the levels of actual citizen power. First up is partnership, rung 6.
Right. Partnership is where things get real. Citizens start to genuinely negotiate and engage in trade-offs with the power holders. They get real power through things like joint policy boards, shared planning responsibilities, mechanisms where authority is actually distributed.
And the Philadelphia Model Cities example sounds like a classic case of this.
It's a fantastic example. Citizens there had been burned before, felt conned by earlier participation efforts. They refused to play that game again. They actually wrote their own participation plan, submitted it, and got it adopted. They secured a significant subcontract, allowing them to hire their own staff, pay their own leaders, and crucially gain veto power over the city agency's plans.
Wow, veto power, that's real leverage.
Absolutely. And it highlights a key point Arnstein makes. This kind of power sharing often isn't given freely. It's usually won through organized citizen demands and tough negotiation. You need a strong community base to make it happen.
So partnership is about sharing power, negotiating as equals, more or less. What's next? Delegated power, rung 7.
Delegated power takes it a step further. Here, through negotiation, citizens can actually achieve dominant decision-making authority over a specific program or plan. Think about those model city policy boards or community action agencies, where citizens hold a clear majority of seats and have specific, defined powers.
So they're really in the driver's seat for that particular area.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Arnstein says at this level, citizens hold the significant cards. They can ensure the program is accountable to them. If disagreements arise, it's the traditional power holders who have to initiate bargaining. She mentioned examples in places like Cambridge, Dayton, Minneapolis, where residents gained this kind of dominant role. There were also models with separate citizen and official groups, but with a citizen veto built in if they couldn't agree.
Interesting. Allows for independence, but still ensures accountability.
Right. It acknowledges that sometimes relationships are too strained for joint planning from the start.
And finally, the top of the ladder, citizen control, rung 8.
This is the ultimate goal for proponents of maximum citizen power. Here, have-not citizens obtain full managerial power over a program or an entire institution. They're running the show.
What are some examples?
Arnstein cites the Houth Area Development Corporation in Cleveland. It got a big grant to plan economic development, create businesses, all run by the community. Also, the Southwest Alabama Farmers Cooperative Association in Selma. Despite intense local opposition, it grew into a large cooperative run by an elected board of poor black farmers, significantly boosting their incomes. Community corporations like the Albina Corporation in Portland or the Harlem Commonwealth Council are other examples.
Full control, full management.
Exactly. It's the ideal of self-determination.
This whole ladder framework, it's incredibly insightful. It just forces you to look beyond the label of participation and ask, where's the actual power?
It really does. And it reveals how often efforts that look like participation are really just informing or placating. Now, Arnstein is fair. She does acknowledge the arguments against full community control, fears about separatism, costs, clashing with merit systems, maybe even ineffectiveness if resources aren't there. She doesn't dismiss those concerns.
Right. She acknowledges the complexity.
Yeah, but she doesn't let those complexities excuse the need for genuine empowerment. The key takeaway for me is just how often organizations think they're engaging citizens, but they're actually stuck way down on those bottom rungs.
Okay, so Arnstein gives us this powerful critique of tokenism. How do we actually move beyond that? Our next sources, Constructive Conflict, Participation, and Shared Governance by Elias and Alkadry, and then Designing Public Participation Processes by Bryson and colleagues. They really dig into these shortcomings and how we might design for true engagement.
Yeah, that's a good transition. The Elias and Alkadry article starts by noting that traditional representative democracy, while based on popular sovereignty, faces real challenges. Citizens' willingness, even their ability to participate in informed ways, it's not always there. They mention scholars like Bryson talking about public awareness issues, even John Stuart Mill's slightly controversial idea about giving more weight to the whys.
Right, and the traditional public administration view often separated politics from administration.
Exactly. Wilson, Weber.
Yeah.
The idea was citizens participate through elections,
Yeah.
administrators then implement efficiently. But that neat separation just hasn't held up in reality. It's much messier.
And Elias and Alkadry make such an important point. Low political awareness isn't always the citizen's fault. It can be structurally and institutionally induced, meaning things like social inequality, economic barriers, educational gaps, or even just bureaucratic jargon making policy impossible to understand. The system itself can create barriers.
Precisely. It's not just apathy. It can be alienation created by the system. And this leads to a huge problem. If policymakers only gather info from this collective public in a one-way fashion, they miss out on incredibly valuable experiential knowledge, the knowledge people have from their lived
The
experiences.
stuff you only know from being on the ground.
Right. And the article brings in some heavier philosophical ideas here. Standpoint, epistemology, postmodernism, to challenge that old idea of a single objective reality held only by experts.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What's the core idea for our purposes?
The bottom line is challenging the notion that administrators or analysts have the only valid understanding of a problem. Standpoint theory says your social experience shapes your understanding of reality. Postmodernism questions if there even is a single reality, suggesting multiple truths. Both ideas give power back to citizens, arguing their lived experiences offer crucial, valid perspectives that experts might miss entirely. It recognizes different kinds of knowing.
So instead of just harvesting data from passive people, we need something more collaborative, where knowledge is co-created.
Exactly. And this is where Mary Parker Follett's ideas come in, even though she was writing almost a century ago.
Her concepts of community process and constructive conflict.
Yes, Follett advocated for a process where reality is collectively created through deliberation. It's about integration, different ideas building on each other, combining to form something new, a group idea. She talked about power with, not power over, and taking orders from the law of the situation, letting the deliberative process itself define the problem and solution, not just relying on hierarchy or individual expertise.
That feels very different from traditional top-down approaches, and the article connects this to Bell Hook's idea of talking back.
It does. Bell Hook's talking back is framed as this really vital, liberating act, especially for oppressed groups. Finding your voice, speaking as an equal to authority, disagreeing, having an opinion.
Crucial for getting that experiential knowledge out there.
Absolutely. It moves people from being passive objects to active subjects.
Well-
It can empower citizens and administrators by forcing action and challenging that tendency to treat people like statistics, like things.
But the article also suggests talking back, while essential, might still keep things in an us versus them frame, still about power over.
That's the nuance they draw. Talking back is necessary, brings marginalized voices and asserts their truth, but it can remain adversarial, a struggle for power. Follett's constructive conflict aims to go further. It tries to integrate those different viewpoints. Through genuine deliberation, different stances, different truths can actually fuse to create a shared solution, something new.
So using the conflict itself as fuel for creation.
Kind of, yeah. Capitalizing on diversity to build something together. It's focused on joint knowledge creation and that power with idea. Power is shared. Authority rests in the deliberative process itself, constantly redefining the problem based on the law of the situation. It's aiming for transformation, not just transaction.
Okay, so that gives us a philosophical basis for deeper participation. But practically, how do we design processes to actually achieve this? The article Designing Public Participation Processes by Bryson, Quick, Slaughterback, and Crosby seems key here. They stress it's not one-size-fits-all, right? It's iterative design.
Exactly. They frame it as an evidence-based design science approach, which means analyze the context, be crystal clear about your purpose for participation, and then design, test, learn, redesign. It's a cycle.
And those purposes are really important. What are the main ones they lay out?
They identify several distinct purposes, and knowing why you're doing participation drastically shapes how you do it. First, the baseline. Meeting legal requirements, just ticking the box. Basic noticing, comment periods, maybe use social media. Efficiency is key here.
Okay, the bare minimum.
Then much more ambitious. Embodying democratic ideals. This is about pursuing the public interest through diverse participation, boosting citizens' capacity, creating lasting public value. This needs real effort translation, childcare, accessible locations to be truly inclusive.
Thinking about fairness, who benefits, who might be harmed.
Right. Third, simply informing the public. Transparency about decisions, changes. Sometimes just clear communication is enough for this. Fourth, and this is a big one, producing higher quality policies and plans. Better content. This demands deliberative, collaborative methods. Sharing info, real exchange, promoting learning. It might even lead to redefining the problem entirely, finding solutions no single expert thought of.
Using the collective intelligence.
Precisely. Fifth, enhancing legitimacy and trust, avoiding rushed decisions, ensuring procedural fairness, generating knowledge together. This builds acceptance, reduces conflict later on. And finally, a long-term view, creating adaptive capacity, building relationships, social capital, trust, so the community can tackle future problems together. This needs ongoing, deliberative approaches that help people understand each other's values and interests.
So the purpose really dictates the necessary depth and style of participation.
Absolutely. And the article stresses resources too. Participation costs money and time for organizations and for citizens.
But it can also generate resources, right?
That's the crucial counterpoint. A well-run process creates new information, motivates people, builds buy-in, reduces delays or lawsuits. It builds trust, social capital. These generated resources, knowledge, commitment, relationships, can far outweigh the costs if designed well.
They also talk about rules and structures and managing power dynamics. That seems critical, linking back to Arnstein.
Utterly critical. If participation just reproduces existing power imbalances, it's failed. As designers, managers need to ask, who sets the agenda? Whose knowledge counts? How is input received?
Moving beyond the formal hearing where a few people dominate.
Exactly. Using one-on-one talks, small groups, even better, letting citizens co-produce the agenda. That's real power sharing, moving from just reacting to proactively shaping the discussion.
And technology, it has a role, but with caveats.
Huge potential, yes. GIS, visualizations, interactive websites, they can share info, build understanding, allow interaction on a massive scale.
The digital divide.
But the digital divide, yes. And resource limits for agencies deploying fancy tech. So technology needs careful thought about equitable access. It has to enhance, not accidentally exclude, aligning context, purpose, design, technology that's the key to building public value.
Okay, so we have design principles. Now let's look at the bigger picture ambitions. Fung's piece, Putting the Public Back into Governance, examines what deeper participation might actually achieve. Effectiveness, legitimacy, social justice, the big goals.
Right. Fung notes this real proliferation of experiments in participatory governance lately, driven by government constraints, public demand, technology. And he stresses that while public hearings are common, so many other ways are possible. And it's not just activists pushing for this anymore. Politicians, consultants are involved too. He then breaks down how these innovations try to hit those three big values.
Let's start with legitimacy. How can participation help rebuild trust, which seems to be declining in many places?
Fung points to declining trust in institutions, lower voting, weaker parties, less faith in government. He highlights really bold examples trying to counter this, like citizens' assemblies in British Columbia and Ontario and the California Citizens Redistricting Commission.
These mini publics.
Exactly. Small groups of ordinary citizens, often randomly selected, well-supported, tasked with solving complex design problems, like the BC Assembly recommending electoral system changes, or California's commission. 14 citizens, Democrats, Republicans, independents chosen from thousands of applicants. Their job, drawing electoral district maps, taking that power away from politicians prone to gerrymandering.
That's radical. What made them potentially legitimate?
The key was empowerment. Their decisions either went to a binding referendum, public vote, or, in California, they had the direct power to draw the maps. It bypasses the politician's conflict of interest. The legitimacy comes from people seeing someone like me, an ordinary citizen, making these crucial decisions, not self-interested politicians. But Fung is cautious more. Co-optation is still a risk. It's an ongoing experiment whether this can fully fix those deep legitimacy problems.
Okay, what about effectiveness? Making governance actually work better at solving problems.
Here Fung talks about multi-sectoral problem solving, getting citizens involved in tackling those wicked problems, education, health, environment. Citizens help frame issues, weigh trade-offs, provide that crucial local experiential knowledge, even become co-producers of the solution.
Like that New Mexico example, strong starts for children.
Exactly. Civic groups ran dialogue circles with ordinary citizens. Small groups facilitated discussions using background info. They identified local challenges in child development, proposed solutions, assessed feasibility, and this directly influenced policy, even contributing to new state legislation. That's tangible effectiveness driven by citizen input.
Then there's that other intriguing idea, individualized engagement or personalized co-production. What's that about?
This is quite different. It's a lot about collective decisions, more about enlisting individuals to help solve social problems that often relate to individual behavior or circumstances.
Like parent-teacher conferences.
That's a very basic example, yes. Fung describes a much more sophisticated one, the Collaborative Care Network, C3N, for pediatric IBD, irritable bowel disease. It connects hospitals, doctors, and thousands of young patients, using digital tools, apps, reminders. Patients track their own condition, share experiences, collaborate closely with doctors.
So it's ongoing data-driven collaboration.
Yes. Not a single meeting, but continuous behavioral change and data sharing. And the results were stunning. Remission rates jumped from 55% to 78%. It shows how aggregating individual actions, supported by technology, can tackle large public health issues effectively.
Fascinating. Finally, social justice. Fung seems more pessimistic here.
He does. He notes this is where participation often faces its biggest hurdles. Participatory budgeting, for example, started in Porto Alegre, Brazil, with explicit goals to redistribute resources to poorer areas. Real social justice aims.
But that often gets lost when it travels elsewhere.
That's Fung's point. When adopted in other places, that strong redistributive focus often fades. He argues the problem isn't the design of the tool, it's political. Leaders often lack the will or motivation to use these participatory projects to really advance social justice. They might prioritize effectiveness or legitimacy instead. The tool could be used for redistribution, but the political drive is often missing.
So the design can enable it, but doesn't guarantee it without political commitment.
Exactly. Participation alone doesn't deliver justice. It needs explicit political intent. That's a crucial, sobering point. Leadership matters immensely.
Okay, that really connects the design principles to the ultimate goals, but it also leads us perfectly into this whole measurement issue. How do we know if any of this, the participation, the governance changes, is actually working? Our next source, The Performance Paradox in the Public Sector by Van Thiel and Liu, throws a bit of cold water on the idea that measuring things automatically leads to improvement. They introduce this performance paradox.
Yeah, this is a really critical piece. It warns that even though governments are measuring more than ever, that audit explosion Power talked about, there can be a really weak link, or even no link, between the indicators and actual performance.
And numbers look good, but things aren't actually better.
Precisely. Or worse, the act of measuring might even make things worse in some ways. It begs the question, why does this happen? What creates this disconnect?
The article outlines several reasons. What are the main culprits?
Well, first, they talk about just rundown indicators. Over time, measures can get stale. They don't differentiate anymore, or they become too easy to meet. They just lose their value. Second, elusive policy objectives. Public policies often have multiple, sometimes conflicting goals. This means indicators are rarely neutral. They get contested, and they can cause dysfunctional effects.
Like the cream skimming example.
That's the classic one. Labor exchanges, needing to hit job placement targets, focus on the easiest clients to place, cream skimming or cherry picking, while neglecting those who need the most help. The numbers look good, but the underlying problem isn't solved fairly. Third, just basic measurement problems. Public agencies are often monopolies, no direct competitors. So finding good benchmarks for comparison can be genuinely hard. And fourth, a really big one, measure fixation or gaming. This is where the people being measured figure out what the bosses care about and focus only on hitting those targets, even if it distorts the real work or doesn't improve overall service.
Playing to the test, essentially.
Exactly. Adapting behavior to the measure, not necessarily to genuine improvement.
And sometimes this paradox isn't accidental. Organizations might deliberately obscure things.
Yes, the article points that out too. If an organization feels an audit is just about distrust, they might subtly sabotage it. Or they might hide poor performance by misrepresenting data. This could involve tunnel vision, focusing only on what's easily measured, ignoring harder to quantify but important aspects. Or sub-optimization, reporting only on the efficient parts, hiding the problems elsewhere.
And the consequences can be severe, like that in-shade firework factory disaster.
That's the chilling example they use. A terrible explosion, lives lost, a neighborhood destroyed. The investigation found it resulted from an accumulation of small problems and a clear failure of monitoring by multiple authorities. Illegal activities weren't caught. Licenses were wrongly renewed. It highlights how undetected performance paradoxes, where things look okay on paper but aren't, can have devastating real-world consequences when supervision fails.
So just collecting data isn't enough. We need to be incredibly careful about how we measure, what we measure, and who develops the measures to avoid these perverse effects. What does the article suggest for actually detecting or preventing this paradox? How do we get beyond just ticking boxes?
They suggest looking closely at a few things. How many indicators are there? Do they cover all the important tasks, or just a few easy ones? Few indicators, narrow focus, unchanging over time, those are red flags for gaming. And critically, who develops the indicators? If the organization measures itself, manipulation is easier. If only the bosses set measures, they might only get the info they asked for, not the full picture.
Finding that balance seems key.
It is. Also, look for gaps in reports, what's not being reported, and check the administrative context. Are staff just trained to produce acceptable data for auditors? The bottom line seems to be finding a balance between too much and too little measurement pressure, and crucially, involving all stakeholders, including citizens, in developing indicators. That helps build genuine accountability, not just compliance.
Right, bringing it back to participation, which leads us perfectly to our next couple of sources. Let's connect these two threads, Citizen Participation and Performance Measurement with From Measurement to Management by Mary Brenna Sanger, and Outcomes-Based Performance Management in the Public Sector by Carolyn J. Heinrich. These look at how performance measurement is actually being used or not used in state and local government, and the role citizens play, or maybe should play.
Sanger's piece starts with a really hopeful idea. Performance measurement can help restore citizen trust by making government activities transparent, showing value for money, and she argues strongly that citizens shouldn't just be seen as customers, but as owners, issue framers, co-producers, and evaluators. That implies a much deeper role.
A real partnership role like Arnstein's higher rungs.
Exactly. But then comes the reality check from her research. Very few places actually involve citizens in choosing what gets measured. And even fewer think citizen input in that process is very important. A survey found only 36% thought citizens were very important here.
Wow, that's a massive disconnect between the ideal and the practice.
It really is.
The sources give some city case studies that illustrate the spectrum, don't they?
They do. You see the variation clearly. Portland and Phoenix, for example, showed pretty limited citizen engagement and performance measurement, mostly just satisfaction surveys. And the data wasn't really driving budget decisions or management changes, more like PR.
Checking a box again.
Seems like it. But then you have Des Moines. They had a city manager who really valued data, a culture of transparency. They did something pretty ambitious, trained citizens to use handheld computers, this ComNet system, to measure neighborhood conditions themselves, block by block.
So citizens were collecting the data.
Yes, and communicating their priorities based on what they saw. And the city agencies actually used that citizen-generated data to reorder service priorities. That's a direct feedback loop.
That sounds much closer to genuine partnership.
It does. Then you have Baltimore's Citistat. That was a different beast altogether.
Famous or maybe infamous?
Depends who you ask. It was top-down, driven by a very strong mayor, Martin O'Malley, modeled on the NYPD's CompStat. Very data-intensive, continuous geographic data, regular public grilling sessions for managers.
High-pressure accountability.
Immense pressure. Supplemented by a 311 call center for citizen complaints, providing real-time feedback. And the message was clear. Perform or you're out. It worked because of that strong leadership and Baltimore's particular form of government. That level wasn't seen elsewhere.
And Worcester showed another model, driven by an outside group.
Right. A civic organization, the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, pushed for similar efforts, including that ComNet citizen monitoring. Sometimes that external push is needed if the internal culture or political will isn't there.
So leadership and culture are huge factors, and overcoming resistance from managers who fear being measured.
That's a constant theme. Managers worry about being held accountable for things they feel are outside their control. That fear drives resistance and can lead right back to that performance paradox, gaming the system instead of improving it.
And Heinrich's article, Outcomes-Based Performance Management, reinforces that it can work, but the design is crucial.
Yes. Her research, especially on federal job training programs, JTPA, showed performance standards can improve outcomes, but you have to get the measures right. They need to be aligned with goals, accurately reflect performance, be simple enough to administer, and this is key, hard to game. She found, for instance, that when private sector reps had more authority in those programs, and when the focus was clearly on employment rates, participants actually achieved higher earnings. Specific design choices matter.
Which connects right to our last source. Does performance management lead to better outcomes? Evidence from the U.S. public transit industry by Poyster, Pasha, and Edwards. This sounds like it provides some hard numbers.
It does. It's empirical research looking specifically at transit systems. They found, quote, limited evidence, which in research terms means statistically significant, but perhaps not overwhelming, that both strategic planning and performance measurement contribute to better performance.
Specifically ridership.
Yes. Agencies that engaged more proactively in strategic planning, setting goals, targeting markets, and performance measurement, tracking progress towards those goals, saw gains in ridership. Strategic planning provides the direction, performance measurement keeps the focus. Their models estimated, for instance, that a 1-unit increase in performance measurement activity led to about a 13% increase in ridership for the typical system.
That's not insignificant.
Not at all. And a similar increase in strategic planning activity was linked to about a 7.4% ridership increase. So Despite all the challenges, the paradox, resistance, design difficulties, there's evidence that doing this well can lead to measurable improvements that benefit the public.
So the ideal seems to be well-designed measurement tied to clear strategic goals and, going back to Sanger, ideally involving citizens in defining what good performance actually looks like from the start.
That seems to be the synthesis, yes. Integrating participation deeply into the performance management cycle itself.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground for our PP 5340 study group today, from the basic challenges of resource allocation to the heights of citizen control and the tricky business of measuring success. So, wrapping up this deep dive into the role of citizens, what are the big takeaways? It feels clear that while the idea of citizen participation is fundamental, the practice is, well, it's complicated, deeply complicated. We saw Arnstein's ladder just powerfully illustrate that not all participation is created equal. Some of it is just manipulation, pure tokenism. Moving up that ladder towards genuine power requires conscious effort and design.
And that design piece from Bryson and colleagues is key. Being iterative, clear about the purpose, really grappling with power dynamics of resources, making it inclusive.
Absolutely. And we explored newer models trying to push beyond tokenism, Follett's constructive conflict, Fung's mini-publics that individualize co-production, all aiming for real joint knowledge creation, empowerment, using deliberation, technology, striving for effectiveness, legitimacy, and maybe even social justice. Though social justice remains the toughest nut to crack politically.
It often does. And then we hit that performance paradox from Van Til and Liu, the danger that our measures don't reflect reality or even get manipulated. And finally, Sanger, Heinrich, Poyster showed us connecting participation to measurable outcomes is tough, facing political and cultural barriers, but also that well-designed performance management can lead to real improvements.
What really stands out to me is that tension between the democratic ideal, maybe citizen control on Arnstein's ladder, and the sheer practical difficulty of governing complex systems. It's not just more participation is always better. It feels more like smarter, more empowered, more genuinely integrated participation is better. Consciously trying to climb that ladder, aiming for power with, and making sure our performance measures actually track what matters to citizens.
That's a great summary. And it leaves us with a question perhaps for you, our listener. When you encounter public participation efforts in your own life, your community, your work, can you now maybe diagnose where it sits on Arnstein's ladder? Is it manipulation, consultation, partnership? And thinking about that, what steps, even small ones, might help push it higher toward more genuine partnership or control? And maybe more fundamentally, how can we as citizens demand more effectively that our input isn't just heard, but actually integrated into how problems get defined, how solutions are developed, and how success is ultimately measured? How do we hold government accountable for that deeper engagement?
That's a fantastic challenge to end on, a call to be more critical consumers and maybe more active shapers of participation itself. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the role of citizens in decision-making. We hope you feel more informed, better equipped, and maybe just a little more empowered to engage with the complex, vital world of public policy.